We are going to be talking about Power Query features today, which is very, very exciting stuff. If you're into the whole BI thing, I'll go ahead and kick things off, and I'll introduce the team and the company here in a second. My name's Andrew Moore. I'm with the IronEdge Group. IronEdge Group is a Texas-based organization that has been in business for over 15 years. We are the kind of organization that you come to when you need augmentation of your staff, when you need us to do co-programming, like to teach your team how to get better while we're doing projects together on the BI side. We do projects. We are focused on making sure that we use Microsoft best practices. We're gold partners in data and analytics, and we've got a very experienced team of folks that are here to help build BI as a service or to do specific projects and trainings for your organization. So let me introduce the folks that are going to be on our event today. We've got Daniel Villarreal and George Sturck, both seasoned members of the business intelligence community here in Texas. Daniel's been with us for almost 3 years now. He has been an integral part of the group. He has a degree in data and analytics. He is a Microsoft certified trainer, and he has recently passed his second big Microsoft certification in Power BI and analytics. Which was that? What was the certification that you just passed? What was the one you got, Daniel?
The last one I just passed was the DA100. So essentially just Microsoft certification for Power BI in the new era. Whereas before it was Excel and Power BI.
Right. And nobody has time for Excel.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Hey, crank your mic up a little bit if you can. Crank up your gain.
To my mouth.
Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. George, he has been in business intelligence, analytics, ERP, program development for probably longer than a lot of people have been in IT. He just has recently been working on his master's degree in data and analytics. Am I correct? With machine learning? Is that right?
Data science, yes.
Data science. So pretty heady stuff. He is the head of our business intelligence division and comes with a significant amount of experience on data transformation and program implementation. So we're going to turn the event over to George so he can kind of talk to us about what's been going on in the world. But I will chime in from time to time, acting on behalf of those who are too ashamed to ask the questions of what exactly does that mean. I'll be the guy going, I don't understand. So that's my role here today. So I will kick it over to George with some breaking news and what's new in the world of business intelligence, Power BI, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, well, obviously, Power BI is an ever-changing beast, right? Monthly releases, new updates. But really, for us, we want to really talk about Daniel's experience with the DA 100 exam. I believe he passed that maybe a week and a half ago. So it's still relatively fresh on his mind. There's not a lot of information out there on the DA 100 right now. So we kind of wanted to get his input, his brain dump on what did the test include, what are some of the things you need to know, what are some of the areas that you really should focus on. And I'll probably ask him some questions about the difference between the old MCSA exam and the new DA 100. So Daniel, you're a recent success story passing the DA 100. Overall, how was it for you? I mean, what are some of the themes that you took out of that exam and would like to share with the people?
Well, first of all, I studied pretty heavily for both the Power BI certification and the Excel certification that were once separate for data analysts in the Microsoft environment. And, I found it kind of funny that Power BI, preparing for that test was a lot of figuring out how visuals are put together and, some elements of data modeling. But what I found was that the Excel test and studying for it actually prepared me a lot more for data modeling in Power BI, all the way from Power Query importing to DAX modeling, with a lot of emphasis on the functions in DAX. And, a lot of people who work with Excel for data analysis, there are a lot of data analysts out there who Excel is their main bread and butter, and they don't use DAX on a daily basis or really ever. So I found it kind of interesting that they organized those tests in that way. And what I found was, I felt I didn't have to prepare too much for the DA 100 exam, especially since there wasn't as many prep resources online for anybody. But with the prior experience of passing those two other exams in my daily activity in Power BI, I found it, a little bit more important to review some of those DAX functions, spend a little bit more time on Power BI licensing and understanding the ecosystem as a whole. But one thing that was my savior was that I went back through some Power Query documentation and looked through a lot of M functions that I really just don't use, or the GUI doesn't really use on a daily basis. And what I found taking the test is not only were there a lot of questions about Power Query functions, but there were also a lot of questions on Power Query as a whole conceptually. There was questions asking if doing a certain import method would accomplish your goal better than others. And one of the trickiest things I saw was actually a question about enabling load on two tables in the Power Query editor window. And there was about three answers on that question that were correct, but there was one that was a little bit more correct than the others. So
Sneaky Microsoft.
Yes, exactly. So I can confidently say that I answered the question correctly, but you need to have quite a good understanding of Power Query and how to optimize your data models to really get through this test. They took a step back from the focus on DAX, and I can really only say that there was about 3 questions on DAX functionality. So those of you out there who are preparing for the DA 100 test, maybe take a load off on DAX if you already know you're pretty good at it, and start delving deeper into Power Query. And I think our presentations today are going to help you out a little bit more with, if not showing you something new, at least showing you something you didn't even know existed.
How many times did you have to take the test?
Only one.
Dang. Yeah. That's like a humble brag. It's like a flex.
Yes, exactly. I mean, luckily as a Microsoft certified trainer, I got that sweet discount too. So
nice. Very nice.
Well, do you
cool.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say cool.
So do you think an experienced, Power BI developer who's maybe been working with the tool for 2 years, could they just come in off the street, take it cold without preparing for the test and possibly pass? They may not get as high of a score as you got, but would they pass?
I'd say someone with 2 years of experience in a pinch could walk in off the street, but they'd be looking at right there on the cusp of passing, only due to the fact that there's a lot more tricky questions. But if you are coming in off the street taking the Excel and Power BI tests from the old era, then you might be a little thrown off by some of the trickiness in the questions. It's just a pretty good idea to prep yourself on what you don't do on a daily basis rather than relying on your knowledge from your daily activity.
Well, and just like you were saying before, with like any of these Microsoft tests, especially anymore, they kind of go through these ebbs and flows where they're like, they want people to get certified. So it feels like the tests aren't that hard. And then a lot of people get certified. And so they want the test to be the certification to be more meaningful. So they try to make it harder. I think we're kind of in one of those flows up where they wanted people into the BI community for Power BI. And now that they're past that and the product's more developed, they've got this way that they want you to do it. Right. Yes. It was like when I started back in the day with Active Directory, like you could get away with a certain answer, right? Like you could probably, like you were saying with some of the Power Query stuff, you could potentially solve the problem in one of 3 or 4 ways, but there is a more Microsoft approved way of doing it, right? Which you're only going to get through studying.
Yeah, I definitely agree that we're in one of those modes at the moment because not to, talk down about the previous Power BI test, but that test, in my opinion, was not a good metric on whether someone was certifiably an expert in Power BI. But this one definitely approaches that level more so.
Yeah, and I just remember too from that first test that was when Power BI had like 8 buttons you could click.
Exactly.
Like it wasn't much going on with the
They're
product.
definitely delving deeper into the iceberg of Power BI with this test.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, so it sounds like study, know your stuff, right? You're not just going to be able to come in and kill it. And if you can go out and try to find some brain dumps, some other things, just be prepared because there's some things out there that are going to try to trick you up.
Mm-hmm.
and apparently focus on Power Query and data modeling, not as heavy on the DAX. That's interesting.
Yes, that was a large thing that I took away from it, was that, if you're someone who's very confident with DAX, you could probably just deal with the test that way, as long as you know every variation of the common functions.
Do they ask you to like code in it, or is it just multiple choice?
It's funny. I always imagine that I'm going to walk in and have to freehand write some DAX questions, but really what it is fill in the blank with a bank of functions. So you have the skeleton of a DAX measure, and you just got to put the functions in the right place. So there's a lot of deductive reasoning that you can kind of rely on, because, if you know only one of these functions has 3 parameters and you see 3 parameters there, then you know what the root function is going to be. So
That makes sense.
And I heard rumor of case studies in this exam. So I know you're the second person on our team to pass it. Any advice for people that are take this test and don't expect to see a case study? Maybe talk about the structure of the case study, what it's like.
So the case studies are very interesting. Our team, we both took the test. We both went through the case studies. We discussed our answer, or the questions we were given between the two of us, and there's quite a breadth of questions that you can receive in the case studies that are very similar. So the case studies start out by just explaining a business at a very high level, and then give you 3 or 4 requirement pages where you look at their data model, you look at their data types, almost like a data dictionary. And then they offer some business analysis where different departments require some specific things for visuals and the way the data needs to be structured. And then finally, they present you with the questions where you have to take each one of those considerations and provide them with the best answer. And although our colleague was able to get through it with a little bit of friction, my questions I found were way easier on a whole to his answers, the answers he had to come up with. Some of the things was setting up a relationship for a measure that would use inactive relationships, and the answer was pretty solid due to the fact that it was a data type question. But a comparable question that our colleague got was much more in depth about how you would create a measure that uses specific functions. So realistically, the warning I'd give to people is, the way you are trying to be tricked in the earlier parts of the test, you can kind of take a step back from that, and it's a little bit more concrete. They're relying on your expertise for these specific questions. Most likely what you believe to be the answer will be the answer, because a lot of the answers have 75% of a correct answer, and then they just throw something kind of silly into the option. So read the entire answer, make sure that nothing in there is just kind of out of place, because if it doesn't feel right, chances are it's not right.
Is it a timed exam, or do you have as much time as you want?
I'm very confident about the way I took the test, and I didn't study as much as some people may need to, but the test is 2.5 hours timed, and I walked out of there after 1 hour and 50 minutes, and that was with a pretty hot pace on the front part of the test. So I can imagine that some people that have to take a little bit more time will really need to work up against the wire for these case studies. The interesting part about the case studies is, once you answer the 4 questions for each one, you can't go back and check your answers or change them or anything. So once you answer a question, it's done.
That sucks.
Yes, it does. And it's a much bigger percentage of the grade than the rest of the test.
Interesting. And you actually went to a test facility, right?
Yes, I did. And luckily it was quiet that day.
Do they give you pen and paper? Can you use a whiteboard, anything like that to help figure stuff out?
Yeah, the testing center was actually nice enough to provide me with some earplugs, so a tissue box to wipe down the dry erase board that they give me with a dry erase marker. So, it was a really good test environment. There are some people that might prefer to take the test at home, and we can say through anecdotal evidence that it's a little bit more stress on taking the test at home with the webcam and having to show some stranger your entire room. And just a little piece of advice: you can't look away from your screen while taking the test for 2.5 hours. So if you're someone like me who needs to look up straight to even think, then you may not want to take the test at home. I highly recommend taking it at a testing center.
Yep.
Wait, they make you show them your room?
Yes. You have to pick up your webcam and move it around your room to show them what you could possibly be looking at.
Whoa, that's crazy. So like so they want to make sure that there's not like George isn't hiding under your desk to give you answers.
Yes, exactly.
That's bananas.
Or that your wife isn't outside of the window holding little cue cards even.
Dang, that's epic. I had no idea that they were doing that.
Or that you're not going old school style and communicating to someone out in a van who's looking up answers for you. So.
Oh my God.
And I think we've also heard that if you're like in my situation, if you're prone to have a kid run in your background, that's highly frowned upon if you're doing the at home test. So another thing to think about. As if my 2-year-old is going to help.
He's all running back behind there. Mommy says it's a multiple join.
It's it's Morse code actually. He's running in Morse code.
That's right.
Like, did he just say something about a join? You're like, no, he's looking for a sandwich. God, I gotta go.
He told me the answer was fuzzy join, and that's not the answer.
Awesome. Well, good stuff, man. I am super excited that you managed to get that knocked out on your first try, because it doesn't happen all the time. A lot of folks take 2 or 3 times to pass those tests. So congratulations, sir.
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
George, you were going to start down the road today a little bit with our data flows, right? And as our miraculous marketing department pointed out, there's not a whole lot of clip art out there and like photo stuff for flows. So this is what you get. You get people flowing down a river. So
I love it. I think it's calming.
We could have done with a big tube.
The tube would have
Maybe a
worked
big
as well.
tube. Yeah.
The tubes, the internets.
Funny.
Oh, so what are you going to tell us today about data flows?
But so on the topic of Power Query, and it's a relative importance on the not only with on the exam, but in real life and in Power BI. Daniel and I we wanted to just briefly talk about some of our favorite in this case 2 of our favorite features in Power BI Power Query. For me, I really wanted to kind of just share some information about Power BI data flows with the community at large. If you haven't already seen it, if you haven't really explored data flows, you really should. There's a few reasons why, and we'll get into that later. But I think the first question, many of you may have, if you're not familiar with Power BI data flows, it isn't a new tool, right? It's been available for about 2 years in the Microsoft realm, but Power BI data flows, it uses the familiar functions of the transform data button within the Power BI desktop and Power Query and in-steps to allow you to bring data into the Power Platform and the Azure ecosystem. Separate from the Power BI desktop file. So if you know Power Query, you're probably already 99% of the way there to knowing data flows, right? And effectively, and we'll take a closer look at this, but effectively, data flows brings a corporate level ETL-like capability to Power BI and the Power BI service, right? So you can really start to abstract data from the source instead of depending on the source to get your data with a Power BI desktop all the time, right?
So hold on, George, just so I can clarify what's going on here, right? So normally when you're bringing data in Power BI, it's coming into the Power BI desktop system, and you're able to do your transformations and stuff back there and inside the actual application itself or at the desktop level. But the data flows puts it in a different place or takes the data and from different places. Kind of explain to the dumb guy here how that works.
No, good question. Let's go to the next slide if you don't mind.
Well, there you go. I was seriously not playing. I had no idea.
Nope. So just one click. Don't click too many times. All right, perfect. So what you can see here, right? This is most Power BI projects, right? They start in BI projects in general, right? They start off innocently enough, right? I have one report, one dashboard that serves either one group of users or one specific use case, right? and I do my connection, set up my gateway, and I'm pulling data from from either a cloud or an on-premise data source, right? And then if you click a couple more times, maybe 2 times. Yep. So then what you'll see is, without fail, right? One Power BI report begets another Power BI report, which begets another Power BI report. And typically what you'll find, and what we see all the time, is these, every one of these individual Power BI files that we see here, they're going back and hitting the same exact data sources, pulling the same exact data, and and oftentimes running multiple times a day, right? So you're putting a really big load on your source system. You've increased the complexity of maintaining Power BI files individually. Say you do an upgrade in your source system, you have to go back and touch and or communicate and help people help people redo and upgrade every single Power BI file out there, which could become a maintenance nightmare. So with the data flows, if we hit the down arrow again, you can switch to this, right? So you can that first blue line effectively creates a layer of abstraction from your source system, right? So with the data flows data set, you can at scheduled intervals, right? You can refresh the data from the data source, and then have Power BI files hit the data flows data set itself, instead of pinging your poor source system over and over and over again, oftentimes multiple times a day, and for the same exact data. So, right.
So is it kind of like what you're setting up and having that data flow data set? Is that almost like you're warehousing or marting something, but without having to aggregate the data from multiple sources? Is just offsetting it from the source systems and then kind of transforming it there? Or does it still transform at the reporting level?
So it's really, you can add more transformations at the reporting level if you like. You can also embed those same transformations in the data flows data set. That really depends on the requirements and the needs of the community at large. Something else you said, right? Is this effectively marting your data? Kind of, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit, right? So don't think this is especially if you're a bigger organization, don't think this is necessarily your replacement for a data lake or a data warehouse, right? Don't leave this this discussion saying, haha, George gave me a really easy and cheap way to make a data warehouse or a data lake, right? That's not necessarily the case. So if you click down a couple more times, there you go. So we talked about some of the advantages of Power BI data flows, right? So we want to minimize the load on our data source. We can eliminate some redundant queries, and overall we can lower our maintenance burden. All of those are really good things, right? And if you'll switch me over and let me take the
Well,
screen
stop
share.
sharing, sir.
Excellent.
That's good, because I totally was like, hey, look, George found an inexpensive way for us to create a data warehouse. This is going to be amazing for our data. We should be using flows internally. Yay.
So you're right, though. We should be using it more than we are, and we will be using it more than
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. But and a lot of it as far as I don't want to get wrapped around the axles about talking about data lakes and data warehouses and whether Power BI data flows can replace that or not. But for one thing, I would say is don't let the pursuit of perfection stop progress, right? So if you can solve a need quickly with Power BI data flows, let's do it, right? Maybe don't wait months for your warehouse or your lake to come online if you can provide some value using data flows today.
Will this be like, so when you say that, is this almost like a way to create kind of like that proof of concept or MVP if you're going to be going to a Marto warehouse? Like, is that the kind of like, it might be an interesting first step to go to try to solve a problem, to start getting, I know you hate this term, riffing on the data, to like get into it and start looking at the information there without going full bore into something where you're having to like offload and like cube the data somewhere else. Like you can actually build a flow and do something a little more robust with it. Is that?
It could, I think, Microsoft might cringe at that, but no, I think you could definitely do that, right? If you could, this is a way you could go and start, figuring out what you need and how you need to structure it without creating a bunch of, infrastructure on the, in the Azure cloud, right? You can go out and start kicking the tires using data flows and figuring out what what you really need to include in your lake, in your warehouse. How do you need to get it? How do you need to acquire it? Like that. Power Query is a tremendously flexible tool, and it really gives you a lot of options from that perspective to go out and prototype and get something done quickly.
Cool.
So if you guys can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So let's walk through just a few things, right? There is, like I said, if you know Power Query, you probably know 99% of data flows already, right? Because it's Power Query moved to the Power BI service. So if we look really quickly about how we might go about creating a data flow, if you haven't done so already, and as you can see, I already have one that we'll look at here. That's pre-made, and it's using freely available COVID data about U.S. vaccinations. But anyway, to go and create a new data flow is simple. So within a workspace, and here we're in our public demos workspace in the Power BI service, you just click New, Data Flow. Here we want to add a new entity. I believe this is a CSV file that I want, and you can see this is very familiar, right? If you're in the Power BI desktop and get data, not every single feature is available, but the vast majority are. So we'll choose text CSV. I think my clipboard already has something. Yep. This is freely available data. I should not need the on-premise gateway. We'll click next. We'll watch this circle go around and around and around.
That only took a second, George. That was quick.
It's the magic of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So awesome. So this, again, if you're familiar with the Power BI desktop, Power Query, this looks very familiar, right? This is the data profiling screen. We can transform that data just like we would in the desktop, and voila, we see something that looks very, very familiar. You have your source steps that, again, this is exactly what happens in the desktop file. Different steps, changing column types, all of that good stuff. Also, if you can also do a little bit of a shortcut. You can just come straight here with a blank query. You can cut your you can go to the advanced editor in your desktop, and generally do a cut and paste as is with very minimal changes and put it straight into Power Query data flows.
That's actually my preferred method for developing data flows.
I do too. Same here. So we won't save this one off because we already have it created. So I'll just hit cancel and then go back to public demos, and we'll look inside here. So this is our data flow. And within this data flow, we have two entities. One is for vaccinations, and this is just daily vaccinations at the state level, if you're curious about that. And the other one is just a dimensional table, right, with information about U.S. states, latitude and longitude for mapping, population. Pretty simple data set. If you expand the entity names, it'll give you some brief data description about each of the different items in your entity. If we start working left to right here, this button is the edit entry, so this will open up Power Query, right? What we just saw. And as you can see, I couldn't help myself. I went and filtered out did some more filtering and value replacing, just because I'm a nerd. We won't get into this today, but if you have Power BI Premium or Premium capacity in your workspace, you can do some auto ML, right? So you can do regression or classification on or I believe even now maybe some time series type work on your data set. Properties. See, very exciting. You can put in a description. Incremental refresh, right? So this is probably one of the biggest things with Power BI data flows. When Power BI data flows first came out, I believe this was only available to premium customers. I believe it's now available to premium and pro. So this gets you another step towards kind of that corporate ETL light mode that I was talking about. So right now with the Power BI, if you're just in the Power BI desktop, yeah, there's some ways around it, but you're generally going out and pulling really wide swaths of data from your data source. With data flows, you can start doing incremental loads, right? So we can, again, not a complex file, so we can choose a date time field to drive everything off of, right? So and for those of you who have done a lot of ETL work in the past, a lot of these buckets here will start to look familiar to you. So, this is basically your rolling window. So I'm going to retain 4 years of data. I just lost my screen. Technology. And this is more like your prune period, right? So I'm going to, for the past 7 days, I'm going to look and see what has changed, right? So I'm not going back and I'm not dragging the database into the Power BI service every time this runs. I'm really just looking for changes, right? And I'm managing my data set. So really cool, right? So so instead of pulling the entire database, I'm really just looking at changes. So it's really neat. And this is a function that you don't have to code, right? It's just point and click. So some of the things with this, right? So you can, as you can see, if you've done a lot of ETL work in the past, this is pretty basic, right? So this is, you can only key incremental refresh off of one column in your data. You can't do any combined steps. So if you're analyzing purchase order data, a lot of times people don't want to bring purchase orders into their analytics until it's been approved or released, whatever your terminology is. With that, I can't say both, purchase order status and update date. All I can do is update date. But hey, it's better. It's better than nothing, right? So incremental refresh. That is, if really when you think about source abstraction and incremental refresh, those are two huge wins if you do Power BI data flows.
Hey, I have a question about that. So you talked about source abstraction, right? Does this, for the layman, does this potentially complicate reporting? Obviously, you're adding a second step to being able to create reports. So you're not. So if some sort of issue happens with your data in the report, now you're having to potentially dig through two different layers to figure out if there was a change either to something that was in the source systems or in this data flow. Is that something that you see as problematic, or is that just something that's an expected component of adding this layer of ease of report generation? It's kind of the trade-off, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I think, you're absolutely, dead on. I mean, that is one of the trade-offs. So instead of just debugging a single Power BI file, you're really going and you're going and you have two spots to look at. I don't know if that's much different from, if we think about, the slide that we saw earlier where there's, multiple Power BI files going against the source system. You may have to go back and touch all 3, 4, 5, 6, 20 Power BI files if a change needs to be made. Alternatively, if you're driving this off of a, if you're in, a warehouse where you've created views for your customers to get data from, it's kind of the same, right? There's 2 points that you have to debug, at least 2 points that you have to debug there.
But
yes, you are adding a different layer, an additional layer of ETL and reporting.
But potentially you're actually saving a significant amount of time, because if there was a change in the source systems, you would have to debug 15 different reports versus just one data flow.
Yep.
Exactly.
And don't forget, you're really saving you're helping out your DBA on the source system side, and everyone who uses the source transactional systems. So instead of just hammering it over and over again.
And one more question about the data flows. So as far as how are they secured, right? So can you provide access to the data flows in a read situation to other report builders in the organization where you wouldn't want them to have that same access to the source systems, right? Does that make sense? Is there a way that you can create these so that you're minimizing the amount of access that people had? Does this create some level of security?
So yeah, so it leverages just regular old Power BI workspace security, app level security. So your your end users who are just strictly consumers, they would we would say they really should never even see the data flow, right? They just go to the app in Power BI and use their reports that way. Developers, yes, they would have to have access to they would have to have workspace level access to go and retrieve that data. So yes, you are moving a little more. There's a little more of a security, some security planning and thinking you have to do for from that perspective too when you start integrating Power BI data flows into your workflow.
Awesome. Well, good.
Yeah, good. Just really quick. Good question. So you might be, if you're watching this, you might be thinking, oh, that's great. I created it. Now, how do I use it? Well, it's simple, right? If you're in the desktop, you can say get data, and magically, maybe not magically, intentionally, there's a Power BI data flow connector. So I can click on that. I am signed in our domain. I can go to public
Just about
demos.
to ask you about that.
Yeah. I can go into public demos and voila, here it is. I can just I don't have to go out to Johns Hopkins and start getting data myself. We'll assume we'll assume that I did or Daniel did a whole lot of transformation on this this file to get it usable. So I don't have to go back and do that. I just pick it up, click transform data, close and apply, and here we go. I'm ready to analyze data. Right.
That's hot.
It is. It's cool. It's cool. It's a really powerful feature. There's so many more things I could show everyone about data flows, but let's look at one more thing with data flows, and we'll turn it over to Daniel. So I absolutely love this this feature in data flows. So if we look at our workspace settings, oh wait, let me go back to the workspace settings. We'll see this tab over here that's in preview mode for Azure Connections, right? And preview mode doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means there's a different tier of support from Microsoft, right? Because it's not fully certified for live production. That said, we've been using it and testing it for weeks now, and it seems to work. So what you can do here in this Azure Connections, and we'll put a link to the actual Microsoft directions on how to connect this. But you can connect a Azure Data Lake Gen 2 blob storage container to your workspace, right? And once you do that, then the data flows every time that they refresh, they start pumping data into blob storage. And as you guys know, if you're familiar with the Azure data platform as a whole, blob storage is the foundation for your data lake. So we've done this, right? We've been running this for several days on this this U.S. Vaccinations entity. And again, I'm not gonna show you the full path to how to get to a storage account, but this is our container, and I've navigated down to the COVID U.S. vaccinations data set, and you'll see the structure of this is pretty cool. We named this Power BI's the Power BI folder within here is generated by the tool. Then it starts going down the tree of your workspace, and then your data flow name, and then your entity, right? So you can see here, so we've been running this since January the 22nd, and every day that it runs, it fires a new version of the vaccination data out into blob storage, right? So this is low cost storage. It's now accessible to basically every tool in the Azure sphere, right? So I've also, so this is a way if you're using SSIS, Azure Data Factory, you can't you don't necessarily have the out of the box connections to every single thing you have in data flows, right? Data flows can go out and get Excel files and things like Excel files and CSV files on the web. Oftentimes easier than Data Factory can, and then you're pumping it into your blob storage data lake, and now it's accessible everywhere, including Power BI. So really
That's
cool.
cool.
I love it. I love it.
So it acts kind of like as a bridge as well.
It
for
does.
your
Yeah,
data.
it can. So again, absolutely not a replacement for any type of heavy duty ETL or data orchestration tool. Not a replacement for your data lake, but it can be it can be a really beneficial complementary tool.
Super
I
awesome.
love it.
Love it. Good stuff, man. We'll make sure that our handy dandy marketing team goes back and blurs out our information
Yes, please do.
on our Azure container subscription. It's important.
Excellent.
Cool. Well, I think that was the really good info. I know that Daniel's chomping at the bit to go, so we're going to turn it over to him and talk a little bit here about Power Query functions.
Yes. So, one thing working with Power BI is one of my main tools of my trade is, a lot of people expect solutions to be low cost and pretty much take place only in Power BI. And sometimes convincing somebody to pay for some, app service or, even a license for other O365 capabilities is not in the cards. And one thing that I learned how to harness, which kind of empowered me to get a lot more solutions done at very low cost. But there is a bit of a learning curve. It takes a little bit more time to do things this way. Maybe not so much time for learning an entire development stack, but still takes a bit of time. Is using functions in Power Query. So Power Query, the way most people are used to it is just interacting with the GUI, maybe inserting some custom columns with some light Power Query M code. But, being able to leverage the advanced editor as well as write your own Power Query M code is extremely powerful for keeping a lot of stuff inside of a Power BI desktop file, where George's, previous presentation just now was about, solidifying an entire ETL process into one step so that it can be put into multiple places and only managed from one. This is kind of the antithesis to that, whereas Power Query functions are very niche and highly specified to the point where, there's a lot of changing parameters. There's a lot of things you need to update. But once you get it working for your goal in a report, it really opens up a whole new world into meeting business requirements that you previously thought weren't possible. So, just kind of a way that I got into this is I work with a lot of well, actually, I can save that story for later, but we have a date function here on our team that that all of us use because none of us want to ever create our own date dimension in any Power BI report. So we created it once. It's just something we copy and paste from an advanced editor, some M code, and all it asks us for is the start date and the end date of our Power Query function. And what we're able to pull out of that is an entire date dimension with quarter numbers, quarter letters, mixed string and integer values, all representing different time pieces and units of measurement for a specific date. And really all we need to do is copy and paste it from all of our computers. And that's one of the first steps we have whenever we start development on a new report. We're not really in the habit of using old reports to build new ones. We like to start from a clean slate a lot. So having functions really empowers you to do it. And one thing that I've learned is that this max value function that I'm about to go over, I've been able to use it for several different use cases just by changing, some field names and references and table names. And overall, it works pretty much the same over every report. of course I know a lot about Power Query, but I'm able to plug and play in a lot of other reports that need something very similar.
Tell me, so in Power Query, is there some sort of, is it a constantly evolving language? Are there new query functions that become available as they develop in it? Is it loosely based off like SQL functions? Like kind of how does it work? How do you know how to put in the right parameters?
So Power Query is unlike anything I've ever seen before personally. It is not a functional programming language. It is not object oriented. The way I've come to describe it is a linear evaluation step language. So one thing that I've said a lot to trainees is TITO, which is table in, table out. And that's something that's very huge. It's a key factor into understanding Power Query as a whole. And I'll get into a little bit about Power Query, but it really doesn't go through iterative changes or anything like that. There may be new functions that that Microsoft releases that is essentially accomplishing the same thing that a very common nested pattern of two functions provides. But overall, Power Query has actually existed since around 2012. And it's been developed in a way that was used in Excel for a really long time, and essentially everything that you can think of exists, especially when you're combining and nesting multiple functions. But one thing that people need to keep in mind is what you're familiar with Power Query M is what is available to you in the GUI. I think I saw a number somewhere around the fact that only about 30%, not even 30% of Power Query M functions are represented in the GUI for the Power Query editor. So there's really no perfect way to learn how to use Power Query other than using it, playing with functions, editing it. They like to on these Microsoft documentation websites, they have lookups for pretty much every function. For some of the niche functions, all they really give you is what the function is, what are the parameters in very loose terms, and what the return type is. So a lot of it is learning how to work with Power Query, but
it's also like kind of like Excel and stuff. When you would use the querying functions in those systems, you can nest things and like really build off of stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Nesting is a huge part of advanced Power Query programming. And, I won't be showing off any today. And that's actually a boon to some people who may be looking for a max value function because, some of the code I'm going to show you today, you'll be able to copy and paste. And if you have any familiarity, you'll be able to understand what I'm putting down.
Cool. Do it.
Yeah, so this max value function that I want to show off, just to confirm my screen is showing.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I want to kind of go off on Power Query for a second. Power Query is definitely crucial for development in Power BI, especially when you want to create an optimal data model that lends itself to proper analytical data stories and as well as user stories, and making sure that the data isn't crafted for one specific thing. One of the worst things that you can ever encounter as a Power BI developer is developing in a way that puts rails around your report, and somebody asks for a feature that they've seen before in another report, and you can't build it because you set up the data model in too direct of a manner. Having a best practice data model, which starts with Power Query M, is a way that you can be reactive and responsive in your development. And as all of us who develop these reports know, there's no such thing as bad feedback. And you want to be able to respond to that feedback as quickly as possible. And it all starts with Power Query M. So what you'll see here is I included an image of this book, Collect, Combine, and Transform Data Using Power Query in Excel and Power BI. It's by Gil Raviv. It's published by Microsoft, and I highly recommend it for anybody who doesn't really know where to start with Power Query M. You may be one of those people out there who just had Power BI thrust upon you. You're really good at understanding how to work with it through the GUI, but you don't know how to take that next step forward. This book is a great way to start.
we are recommending books. Just so
Yes.
everybody is clear, like books are good, right?
Books
Like,
are very good. And
books are good.
there's a way to make it fun by just opening up to a random page and trying to test out the function that they're talking about or the principle. This isn't a book that you need to read all the way through and stop. You know, it's an excellent reference book that me and my colleagues will still pull out today. But, you know, going back to what I said about a minor fraction of M functions being represented in the GUI, that's absolutely true. There are some functions that the moment you inject it into some of your custom code, you lose the ability to edit that function's settings with the gear icon in Power Query applied steps. I can show what that means in a bit, but you know, there are some cases where DAX just doesn't accomplish business requirements, and Power Query, which can be used to create functions, will actually be your savior when it comes to these moments where, you know, you think you can do something easily in DAX, but there's just something being as a roadblock that means you can't accomplish a business requirement by transforming this type of data in DAX. Or if you already have a slow report where it takes 8 seconds to load the page, adding any more DAX with heavy, you know, data transformations is just going to turn that 8-second load into a 10-second load. And that's the difference of keeping your job, or, you know, maybe the budget just doesn't fit Power BI anymore.
So just so I'm clear, like on DAX, whenever you're doing something using DAX, it's like sometimes it's not as elegant, I guess, as Power Query. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like it's like using a hammer versus a scalpel. Like, is that kind of what you're maybe getting out there?
Yeah, so a good way that we like to think about it is DAX is evaluated in real time. Whether you're looking at it through a browser or looking at it in Power BI desktop, your RAM is being used in some form or another. With Power Query, the data on the back end in Power BI service, or whether you're refreshing the data locally, is only run once. You know, once all the steps are evaluated and your data model's refreshed, those steps don't need to be rerun again. DAX, however, every time you click on a visual, every time you load a page, and every time you're basically working with Power BI, DAX is evaluating. And if you have multiple calculated tables, measures that are showing different measure, you know, selector method measures that return different measures based on context. If you're doing a lot of table searching, a lot of relative things that can really be done with joins, you know, you're already slowing down your page loads because all of this other stuff needs to be evaluated. So I'm not saying measures are bad though.
But beyond, sorry to interrupt, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Beyond the actual use case functions of there are certain things DAX can't do, this is a UX opportunity for any good Power BI developer to make their products more effective and digestible, because you're not sitting there waiting on loads and refreshes and stuff. Like, as you're clicking through your report, you're getting a more responsive report if you use the Power Query correctly. Is that
exactly?
Okay.
If you're somebody who rides the calculated columns a little too hard and does a little too many related table calls, and you know, you're constantly using DAX to pull different values from different tables where a join could have really solved your issue on the back end. You know, these are things that can really speed up your report and the functionality. It goes from an okay report to a wow report if your page loads are under 2 seconds. And, you know, writing DAX too hard can really adversely affect the performance of your reports. There's some mental calculus people need to do to, you know, kind of understand when is appropriate to use DAX. And sometimes you just need to kick some of this functionality to Power Query, because if the data is going to be static, or if you're, you know, referencing some specific data that resides in another table, Power Query can most likely get it done. And there are some people that, you know, they're a little scared off about what's required of them in Power Query, and they know they can do it in DAX quickly. But if this is adversely affecting your performance, it may be worth it to move some of this stuff to Power Query. And the function I'm going to show is a great example of that. So what can Power Query do for everybody out there? Of course, we can combine and transform data. We can mash up data to meet reporting goals. There's so much that can be done through the GUI, but the key is being able to write Power Query M. My advice is to not be afraid of the advanced editor. It's worth your salt to just create a sandbox file and mess with the advanced editor with data and just play with some functions, learn how to edit the advanced editor. Don't be afraid to copy and paste some code in the advanced editor and edit it in the text editor of your choice. But the IntelliSense in advanced editor actually works now. I was doing this when the IntelliSense didn't work, and I was just kind of shooting in the dark. But all of this is to say that a form of functional programming is possible. And functions in Power Query, they can do many things. All the way from niche transformations and assignments to meet requirements to basic functions to speed up your development start. And what I mean by this is, basic functions to speed up development start. That's our date function that we have here at IronEdge that, we basically copy and paste it the moment we start building a report and bringing in data, because, it's a separate thing entirely, but we always recommend having a date dimension. And when I talk about niche transformations and assignments to meet requirements, there are times like the function I'm going to show you about max values, and there are times where you need to use Power Query to parameterize actual requests. And the way to do that is through functions in Power BI. A lot of people will just call it parameterized queries, but effectively, if you've ever built a parameterized query, you're on your way to building a function in Power BI. You're already using variables and parameters and creating your Power Query M code. Just take it one step further and have it do something before you return the data set. And so the last thing is functions in Power Query. They can accomplish something you'd rather do in DAX, but you can't. And I'll get into that right now. So why did I make a max and min value function in Power BI? Well, we have a client that does that's involved in oil drilling, and drilling takes days or even weeks. And a drilling job has many things that can change, but one of the main things that changes is a bit size that's actually on the drill. What I needed was a way to find the date a drill hit the total depth based on several factors before I even grouped the data. And for anyone familiar with Power Query, the grouping is most likely going to take place in Power Query. So obviously I can find the min date and the max date using DAX with actual functions in DAX. And of course, some people out there might be saying, well, we have the min and max features in grouping for Power Query in the GUI even. However, that wasn't going to work for me because there were some crucial calculations that needed to be done based on the date on the line. And if I grouped and tried to find that min and max date during the grouping, I would lose those intermediary dates where things may have changed that I needed to take note of. So one thing that was extremely important, one thing that was apparent to me was that even though I'm grouping all of the data, the daily data into a job level metric, I needed the min and max date before I even grouped them. Therefore, I could not do this in DAX. And this was crucial to the most basic business requirements of this report. So what I did was I just created a function that allowed me to get the date before I performed the critical transformations. And this was done through Power Query M advanced functions. And you'll see here, these are two buttons that you may be afraid to have ever used. I will encourage you to get started and make these your best friends. So I'll go ahead and show everybody this really simple presentation templates. If you're an IronEdge super fan, you've seen it before from either myself or Greg. Greg's is the one with the light background. Mine is the one with the dark background. That's become the new delineation point. But, there's not really anything to show people on the front end. I just want to get right into it for everybody and show off first our date query. So those of you with the print screen tool, go ahead and hit that now. You can see here that this is our date query that we use for almost every single report. And I've taken to adding my own lines at points when I need to create some custom fiscal periods and things of the like. But let's just walk through what we're seeing here. So you see two let statements. For those of you who have seen Power Query M in the advanced editor, these let statements are just, the basic syntax. Let, and then all of your steps, and then in is your output. And a quick refresher for everybody that is not aware, what I meant by table in, table out earlier is you'll see this table called source, which is my first step. It's always going to be your first step. It's referenced right here. Where is it? Oh, right here from this table from list. You can see that it is using the source table to act upon and transform using the table dot from list function. And moving forward, we can see that table from list is referenced in the next step. And it goes all the way down until we get to our final table, type changes, where we then see type changes as our output table. So that's the basic functions of Power Query. And for those of you who just want this to lift this date function, here you go. You can see that on the outside, we've defined our variables, and our variables for source are going to be start date, which is a date, end date, which is a date, and an optional culture as nullable text. We're not going to get into that right now, but we are setting all of this as a table, and we are doing that with this operator right here, which is pretty basic for setting up your variables in your sublet statement. But this is essentially your bread and butter for creating functions. I'll get more into it as I show you my max value function. But if we look here and I clicked on my function, you can see the start date, which was a variable, the end date, which was a variable, and the culture, completely optional. One thing that Power BI is able to do already from the get-go is I can just say, give me a start date of here, and then I go a little bit into the future. If I invoke this function, I'm going to get that invoked function, which I can change the name to date dimension. Now, this is not what our report is about right now, or our presentation is, but just a little sample of some Power BI functions, Power Query functions. So what I wanted to show you is a little function about pulling the min and max date from a group of sales. So our original table is going to be this sales table. It's your typical training data with sales. We have our product ID, our date of the transaction, and the price of the item. So what I am interested in for the sake of this example is just when was the first time this product was sold and when was the most recent time this product was sold. This will kind of give you an idea of some ability to do this. And, one thing to keep in mind is I could do this with any field in the table. I can pull the maximum amount we sold it for and the minimum amount we sold it for by using the cost as my min and max field. So let's get into exactly what my function is doing here. If we open up the advanced editor, we can see my code is extremely simple, but there's a bit going on here. So my first definition of my variables is going to be the source step is equal to product, which is a variable, date variable, and these two that you may not understand what's going on, and I'll explain that in a second, but I have result column name min and result column name max. The reason why I've abstracted the names of these columns is because I can actually decide what I want to call these in my function call. Instead of pulling just the product and the date, I can actually even change product to the field that I want to group on, and the date to something that describes the field that I want to evaluate. So if we go through here, we can see our source step is equal to the sales table. I'm referencing a table that already exists in our data model. The reason why I'm going to target this on a separate table is actually because I don't want to create a circular dependency in my data. So by referencing a staging table, I'll be able to reference the table and perform groupings on the data that I can then return as a subfield in the function target table. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment.
So
But
hold on. I just want to make sure I'm clear. What you just stated was if you don't define what the source is and you just allow it to be whatever source, right? Then you could create some sort of weird loop in your query because it would keep
Exactly.
dumping data back into its own tables and then spitting it back out, correct?
Yes. So
Okay.
if we take a look here, we can see in my fact tables that I have a sales table. This is the original table that holds the sales table that or the sales data that I created. I duplicated that function or that query, and I put it down here and I called it sales for function call. That's because this version of the query is going to be what I invoke the function upon. And it'll make a little bit more sense when we start mapping our variables to field names. But essentially, the key that we're working with here, all of this is a little bit, well, really the key to this function all exists right here. We have filtered rows and we have grouped rows. So even though I'm going to be acting upon this table, sales for function call, I'm going to make my source table something that is just referencing the data rather than acting upon the table that's holding the data. So filtering rows, I select my rows, and all I want is from the source table, I want the field product ID to match the product that I've selected. And the way that's going to work is when a function is evaluated, I can select the field that product is mapped to. So since product ID is going to be looking for the current row's product ID, I just need the product ID column to be equal to that current variable. So, if you imagine every time this is run for every row on the table, it's grabbing that row's product ID and filtering the sales table to that specific product. So already we're shrinking the data set every time it's running on every single row. Just for ease of use and my readability, I remove every other column in the table besides the product ID and the date. Then I go ahead and filter it again just to make sure that I'm not getting any null values. I don't want any dirty data. This is just data cleanliness 101. I don't want anything to kind of throw off my data. This date transformation, this is a holdover for some people that when you're referencing another table, sometimes your data types change, something that Power BI does on its own. No need to worry about it. This is the bread and butter here, though. Every time I'm running this function for, upon the table, it's running for every single row in the table, looking up data in another table. So this grouped rows function is I'm simply grouping it, acting upon the previous steps table. And for my field that I'm going to call, or I'm grouping it on the product ID, which is one of our variables, but also a field name in the table. I go ahead and get that minimum column name, which I can enter. And I'm using the function list.min on the date. So if you picture it, we have a table with just a specific product, and I just want the minimum date because that's the earliest that was ever sold. And then I am doing the same thing with list.max on the date, and that's the last time it was sold because that's the most recent transaction we have in our database. So by creating this grouping, I'm actually defining a way to grab the smallest date and the largest date based on a specific field for our reference data set. And, for those of you who don't know what the code's doing, feel free to copy that code and kind of break it down on your own. Try to break it. I recommend trying to break it just so you can see what's working and what's not. For those of you who understand Power BI or Power Query, go ahead and try it out for yourself with your own data set. I feel I plainly stated what things you need to change, like table name and column names. But let's just go ahead and try to run it now. I'm going to delete the time that I test run this function. And all you need to do to call your function at this point is invoke the custom function button. Options will come up where I can call my new column name, whatever. So I'll call it content just for this specific action. So I want the first and last sale. Well, what do I need from my parameters? I parameterize the product. So I need to make sure that I'm pulling a column name which matches my grouping that I find appropriate, which is product ID. Then I go ahead and select the date field that I want the min and max of. I don't want the ship date. I actually want the date of the transaction. And this is where things get kind of cool. So I actually don't need to enter any column names here. What I'm doing here, because I made them optional parameters and I'm using them as a dynamic name, is I can actually call this first purchase. I can actually call this most recent purchase. Or sale, sorry. I want to call these sales. And once I hit OK, what I'll get is these small table fields in each one. I can actually click on the cell and I can confirm to myself that I'm looking at product 160 as visible down here. And here's our first sale and here's our most recent sale. With this product, this is our only sale. But if we go here, we see that 791 has quite a bit. So if I go ahead and click on anything from here, we can see that the data does not change because it's a constant most recent and first purchase. And I can confirm that this is product 791 where we're seeing the first sale and the most recent.
Can you return additional data with that function though? Can you also say, I want to know when the sale happened, but I want to know what the price of the sale was at that time and the price of the sale it is at this time?
You can do just that. This takes a little bit of Power Query knowledge, but going to the definition of my function, all I need to do is make sure I keep that in this step right here. So if I wanted the cost, I could just make sure that it's in my keep statement. And if I go ahead and check it out, wait a minute, why didn't it show up?
You have to reinvoke the function.
Possibly, I may have, oh, you actually do need to add a statement that will make sure we have the column represented here. So it would be this.
Live demos, gotta love it.
Yes, sir. This is also a great way to show off how easy it gets to write custom M code once you know what you're doing.
Once you know what you're doing.
Yes.
Like I'm watching you. It's like watching somebody read sheet music. I'm like, that's awesome. I couldn't do it.
And there we have it.
So
that's, some quite advanced stuff, but this webinar is mainly to show people what is possible and the fact that, you may be a little afraid to tell somebody that something isn't possible with Power BI, but if you just learn a little bit more and explore a little bit deeper into the iceberg, you can actually get really creative with your solutions to some of the problems you've been having in Power BI. I thought I was going to have to turn around and tell our client that, this wasn't going to be possible with what they were asking for, even though it sounded simple on paper. And sometimes you just got to try a little bit more and expand your knowledge about how to use the tool that you're so familiar with.
Awesome. Well, I felt like this was incredibly informative. I want to thank everybody who joined us today and want to let y'all know we appreciate you. And we'll be doing more of these in the future. So if you like what you see here, feel free to reach out to the IronEdge Group. We're www.ironedgegroup.com and explore our website and reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you. Also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube, because that's where all of our awesome content is. So I want to thank Daniel and George for their insights and super awesome knowledge when it comes to our products and our in the data science industry as a whole. So appreciate you guys putting that together, and everybody try to stay I'd say warm this week, but it's
a little too warm this week.
Man, it's
in
Texas. Last week it
turned
was
on the
12.
air conditioner last night.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
So cool. Well, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for everything. Bye.
No problem.